Good morning, everybody. We're here to talk about transition to adulthood, creating a roadmap to your students' independence. So we are Matrix Parent Network, and our mission is to empower the families of children with special needs to successfully understand and access the systems that serve them. That's everything from the regional center to the school system to human and health services, anything that might be useful for advocating for your child and planning for their future. And through our education advice, we want you to become successful advocates and role models for your children. So hopefully what we can teach you and give the knowledge to you makes you a better advocate. So we have 3 designations. We're a Family Parent Training and Information Center, designated by the Office of Special Education through the Department of Education. And we serve children from birth to 26 in Napa, Sonoma, Solano, and Marin. We're also a Family Resource Center that's through the Department of Developmental Services, and we're serving infants to toddlers in Marin, Sonoma, and again, Solano County. And then we're called a California Family Empowerment Center that's designated by the Department of Education, again, doing the underserved in those 3 counties, or 4 counties, excuse me. So I am Birgit. I have a son who is 14 who has intellectual delay, and I have a son who has ADHD. I've been a parent advisor here now for 5 years at Matrix Parent Network. So I am in the process of the transition planning for my son who's 14. Margaret, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Margaret. I'm Senior Parent Advisor at Matrix. I have 2 kids who are now young adults. Both had IEPs since middle school. And so I did go through the transition planning process with them. And in effect, I still am with my 24-year-old. And we also have another parent advisor who's in training, who's listening in. Hill, do you want to introduce yourself or not? It's up to you.
Hi, I'm Hill. I have 2 young children, a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I recently joined Matrix, and both my children have learning differences.
Okay.
So that's the 3 that are represented here. We have other parent advisors with kids at different age stages, as well as with different disabilities. So we're a very well-diverse group of parent advisors. So these are the points we like to talk about: the age of majority, the ITP, the Individualized Transition Plan, what course of study track your daughter or son are on, diploma track versus a certificate track, and what the agencies and services might be that will support your young adult after high school, and again, the importance of self-advocacy. So when does transition planning start? Really, if you think about it, transition planning starts from the time that you find out your child has special needs, because we have multiple transitions our child goes through. But when it comes to transition to adulthood, the best thing is to start talking about transition planning at 14, as I am doing now with my child. But by law, transition planning as part of the IP starts no later than the year that your son or daughter turns 16. So it's always good to kind of look forward to see what your child may need when they become an adult. Matrix Transition to Adulthood Resource Guide is a good guide to look at, and also Connection California Transition to Adulthood is another good resource you can use. So who's involved in the planning? Well, it's of course your student who is going to start learning how to self-advocate. If your child doesn't know how to do that or doesn't have the means of doing it, you as a parent is also involved. Again, you, as a parent in this kind of transition, you're doing less of the decision making, more of supporting your child with what their interests are and what they would like to do in the secondary school. For those people who have children like my own who is not able to make any decisions, then we become still sort of this advocate for that child. Of course, the school is involved. With my child, he's part of the regional center, so they were involved, and then any other possible service providers that might be integral in the planning. So what is the age of majority? Well, at age 18, your son or daughter become legally an adult, and in meaning that they can legally make financial, legal, and medical decisions. They can also be charged for a crime as an adult, and they make decisions about their education, whether to sign that IEP or whether they want to stay in school. Again, for someone like my son who's not able to make those decisions on his own, we look at a conservator to make those decisions and to have discussions around planning. Not to say he's not part of that discussion, he just doesn't have the means to be able to make decisions on his own. So here we are, the individual transition plan. And this is really what we look at as a student's roadmap to independence. So what is a transition plan? It's a coordinated set of activities, instruction, and services based, again, as the IP is on individual student needs, and it also takes into consideration now the student's interests and preferences. So it's really looking at what they want to be when they grow up. So the IEP is as powerful as the ITP is as powerful as the IEP because it guides the student's transition plan. It's a roadmap to the student's independence, and that's why it's also powerful. And IDA mandates that the ITP is part of the IEP once the student turns 16. So again, as we talked about, transition planning legally starts at 16, but beginning that transition planning or even discussion of transition is best practice to start in middle school. And when you start doing transition discussions and planning, typically earlier, you're going to get better outcomes. So what should it address? It should address post-secondary education, the ability to work and what that might look like if you're able to work, if you need supported living, if you can do independent living, what your daily living needs are. And these are the three primary things that the ITP looks at, but also think about social and recreational interests and what healthcare issues may come up and decisions around that, and how will that person be able to manage their finances, or will they need to have someone to help with that as well. So really looking at the big picture. Again, like I said, the first three are something that the ITP focuses on, but the three ones below that are as important. So here are the sections of the ITP. You'll find that they are looking for student information, who's been invited, and that's not only the parents, but any outside agencies. Like in the case of my son, the regional center was at our transition meeting, and other people you would like to invite. Is the student participating in the process? Have they used age-appropriate transition assessments and what those results of those assessments are? What that student's post-secondary goals are. Is it training or is it education? Is it employment or independent living? And then finding out what that requirement for a graduation is within the district if you're looking at doing secondary education. They need to speak about the age of majority. And again, in the sense of a child who can't make that decision on their own, is there a conservatorship present? And is it going to be something that they have to plan for? And then really talking about all those transition goals, services, and activities that are in the IEP to be put in the ITP. So this is what it looks like. So it's student's name, the date of birth, the IEP, the ITP date. Was a student present? Yes. There we go. Perfect. Were they just doing the process by doing the assessments? Were the right appropriate transition assessments used? And then also the results of those assessments. So as is the IEP, this ITP is very individualized. It shouldn't be just a checking of boxes. It should be much more elaborate about, of what they found and what that will lead to with planning. So if you find that there's not a lot of meat to the ITP, it's not a very well written ITP. So the assessment should gear how the planning is done and what the goals around those plannings are. So again, as we asked with the IEP, are those transition assessments age appropriate? Do they involve the student? really considering what assessment tools are needed to provide a reflection and an exploration and preparation for that student is an important thing to look at. Where is your student presently? So present levels, where's that student going, and how will that student get there are all considered when looking at a transition assessments. Those are the basic questions they ask. You can find this age-appropriate transition assessment guide in various areas. One of them is the National Secondary Transition Technical Assistance Center. And again, they outline these three basic questions. Where's the student presently? Where's the student going? And how will the student get there? So what do we look at for age-appropriate transition assessments? Is it easy for the student to use? Of course, is it age and grade appropriate? Is it at a language that the student can relate to? Does it get away from stereotypes and biases around career choices? Is it easy to read and interpret? And does it provide the feedback that really leads to reflection? And does it really enhance the students' insights about what there is out there for them that might be appropriate for them to pursue? And does it really reflect the current and emerging job market? And these are the things that the California Transition Alliance suggests is best practice when considering which assessments are used. So why have age-appropriate transition assessments? Well, assessments, as does in the IEP, it identifies the strengths and needs of the student as they relate to their future learning, living, and working environments. Assessment is ongoing from year to year as a part of the overall transition of plans. So the ITP has to look at developing realistic and meaningful goals, which can change and will change as the students' interests change, but as their skill level changes as well. It really helps the student think about what there is out there. So looking at student self-discovery and decision-making. And it's increasing student self-awareness and self-determination, which is a big thing when it comes to your child becoming an independent adult. And it helps this person have a person-centered plan or a person-driven plan, which helps your student plan for life. So again, it's not a cookie cutter because it really looks at your individual child and what their strengths and needs are. So they will look very different from person to person, depending on their skill level, as well as their interest level. So how do we do these assessments? There, again, as you had your IEP done, there are formal standardized tests, there are informal tests, there's inventories for interest and work value, there's personality and preferences testing, work-related temperament scales, vocational assessments, like what is the career maturity, what is their readiness for particular careers, self-determination assessments, again, what is their aptitude and where might they fit best in which job, also behavioral assessments and functional life skills assessments. So this is all part of getting to that point of really understanding what the child's interests are and what the ITP looks like when written.
So
Next one.
Yeah, I just want to, so, work with your team to make sure that appropriate assessments are done. There's such a broad range of assessments that can be done, and it's going to vary a lot with what your student is capable of and what they're interested in. There's such a wide range of kids with IEPs, so it's hard to say which of these tests are appropriate for any given young adult, but work with your team to figure out what kind of assessments are being done and whether you think they're actually appropriate for your situation.
Right, so this is no different than looking at an IEP with critical eyes. It's really, and the IEP assessments as we had done, looking at if they mirror really what the child's interests are, what their strengths are, and making sure those goals are appropriate. Here are the resources. They're only a partial list. There's tons of them. We have stuff in our Matrix website. There's the California Career Zone, the California Resource Network, the CASI Life Skill, and the Brand Special Education. So, there's so many questionnaires out here, and every district has their own questionnaires that they like to use. So ask your IEP team how they're doing those assessments and what those resources are. And then you can do your own research to see if that's appropriate. You can always suggest if they'll use another one, but they may not be as familiar with the one that you've looked at or requested.
Okay, and I think this is the point at which
That's you.
I'll be taking over for a little bit. So think about the fact that just like the IEP that you should be familiar with at this point, there are going to be goals as part of the ITP. And remember, there's a couple of pages of this form that are now added to the IEP. If you're not looking for it, you might even miss it. So make sure you're looking for the ITP form as part of your students' IEP starting the year they turn 16. And there'll be goals associated specifically with the ITP as well as the IEP. And one of the things we're going to talk about is how these two sets of goals relate to one another. Just like the IEP goals, the ITP goals should be based on those assessments. They're going to be age-appropriate assessments, transition-related assessments, and the outcomes of that are going to help you and the team and your student think about what the goals in the ITP should be. And there's going to be a gap between what the student is able to do at this point based on the transition assessments and what their interest is or where they're going. And this could be a difference in skill level for whether a student can hold a job or whether a student can go on to four-year college or community college. There's going to be a gap in those skill levels, and how are we going to fill that gap as they continue their education? We need to think about the goals in the ITP sort of driving the IEP at this point, not being secondary to it, but really the rest of your students' education is now about this transition. Getting them ready for the transition becomes the most important thing as they move towards leaving high school for whatever comes after that. So the annual goals in the ITP are to be based on identified specific areas of need to be addressed within the next year to move the student towards being able to meet these post-secondary goals before they leave high school. On the this first page of the ITP, we're going to show you the section. There's a goal section, and we'll try to enlarge it. I hope it's big enough that you can actually see the writing here. But there are 3 specific goals that need to be addressed. Training, secondary goal for training and education, post-secondary goal for employment, and post-secondary goal for independent living as appropriate. So the first 2 are required. The third, it depends on your student. If your student is going to need a lot of assistance for independent living, then this goal becomes appropriate. So the team should really look at what the student plans on doing when they leave school. What kind of training and education and employment are required. So those things have to be looked at. And these goals are stated in the student's own words, if possible. If the student needs a lot of help stating the goal, then the goal should at least be approved by the student. So the students should be saying what they want to do after high school, what kind of training they believe should be part of their future, what kind of employment they hope to be seeking. So it's the students' goals really at this point. And then on this form, you have to indicate what kind of activities are going to support that and what kind of community experiences, and then related services as appropriate. So a lot gets packed into this little form. So the community activities and the community experiences and the activities are supposed to reflect the student's interest. The goal is supposed to be attainable, and it has to be observable by the person or agency responsible. And that last one is important. And let's give an example. So the student's interview or career interest assessment, it says they're interested in working outside. They want to work alone sometimes, maybe with other people sometimes. They enjoy working with their hands. Then these interest inventories might indicate that they want to work in garden or landscaping. And so the activities and community experience will lead them to maybe an internship or a work experience with a landscaping company or with the park and rec department doing groundkeeping. So that might be the kind of activity and community experience that's put into the ITP. But what if the student is put in that internship or that work experience training, and it turns out they're just really not interested, they're not engaged, they look like they're bored, they're not, they're not asking questions, they're not really getting into it, then somebody needs to observe and say, hey, wait, maybe this wasn't the right thing. Maybe we have to step back and reevaluate. So that's the reason this has to be something that is observable. We need to know whether progress is actually being made on the goal. And we may need to then think about some new or different assessment. And this is a hard process, but that's why it really is a team effort with community partners, with parents, the youth involved, and the district personnel, the special ed teacher or transition expert in your district. Now, related services are also listed here. And this, for example, could be speech therapy around pragmatics or social cues that are needed in order for someone to be in a work environment. It might involve OT to build core muscles or improve penmanship. Whatever it is, if your student is still receiving related services, those services could somehow be brought into and related to the overarching post-secondary goals. And this is really the important thing to know. It's important to link the activities and the community experiences and related services back to the annual IEP goals. These things are all related within the plan. So we want to think about this as a triangle. There's the post-secondary goal in the ITP, the community activities and experiences that are supporting that, and the annual IEP goal that's related to that. So we'll go over an example in a minute, but remember that these things are all related, and the goals and the activities and the annual IEP goals probably will change a bit from year to year, especially if the transition planning begins, early, like in middle school. But even if it begins at 16, it's probably going to change as the student matures, as interests become clearer, as skill levels change. So this is something that needs to be examined every year, at least every year. And also we want to note that the person and agency responsible, as with IEP goals, sometimes they put down parent as the responsible party, but it really shouldn't be. Like IEPs, it's really school personnel who should be responsible, not the parent. But as we get into transition planning, think about the fact that your role as a parent, while it's changing, you really are helping to provide experiences, helping to provide the effort to help your student figure out what they want to be doing and supporting those activities. So you may, in a sense, be more responsible for these goals than you have been in the past. Exactly how much of a role you want to play, that's pretty much up to you, but many parents really want to take a large role in their students' transition planning. And, we are there to help prepare them. We serve as mentors, as coaches, advocates, cheerleaders. So we're participating in this process. And it's important for us as parents to know how to deal with all the changing systems. We've gotten used to dealing with the school system, and now we have to start thinking about other services, regional centers, Department of Rehab, and other agencies. Sometimes we need to help find the internship or community experience that's going to be helpful in this process. So we really are essential partners as the schools develop the transition plan. And we're, just like we're essential partners in development of the IEP, we may be even more essential in the ITP. So we're going to go through an example. So here's this triangle again, and we're going to talk about how this might happen. And we've taken an example from the actual ITP from someone who used to be on our staff and her daughter. And we're going to talk about how that was put together. So the post-secondary goal in her case, she was pretty clear about what she wanted to do. And this is a student with an intellectual disability. So think about this fact that this can be pretty clear, even if your student is not on diploma track, if they're on certificate track, still they're going to have their ideas about what they want to do, and we need to honor that in the ITP. So she said, upon completion of school, I will look for opportunities to work in a pet store to expand my knowledge of dog care, dog training techniques, dog-related products, customer service, and how to operate a cash register. And I will incorporate the knowledge I learn into developing my own dog daycare business. That is what she clearly wanted to do. So now, what kind of activities are going to support that? So it says the student will then interview and shadow people with experience in the field of dog daycare and with experience working in a pet store. The student will secure a paid job or internship as a dog walker or a pet store clerk to gain experience with the dog's needs and care. Student will role play, providing customer service at her vocational placement, as well as train how to use a cash register. So this is a student who was in an 18 to 22-year-old school system run transition program. And so she was doing this role playing as part of her vocational training in that program. So it's something that she was actually doing in her school setting. The job experience, getting an internship, that's something that can be done with the help of a workability program that's available in many schools. If not, you can work independently with the Department of Rehab or get the person from the Department of Rehab involved in the IEP to help secure an internship for your student. And then there's an annual IEP goal. So this is the ITP goal and the community experience, and that relates back to an IEP goal. So, you're familiar now, I think, with the format of the IEP goals. It says by a certain date, the student will demonstrate understanding of the educational background, job qualifications, and training required for entry-level jobs of interest to her, such as pet store clerk, by identifying at least 5 skills and requirement for each job as measured by a 5-paragraph essay with 80% accuracy for each essay as measured by a teacher created rubric. So this sounds like more like the traditional IEP goal you're used to seeing, but it's very specific to the student's interests and what her goal, her ITP goal is. So this is a little bit complicated to think about, but just think about how all of this is tying together, and the IEP is now being driven by the student's interest in what they're going to do after school. So now we move on to the next section, which is the district graduation requirements. And you can see it's shown here, course of study. And this is where you talk about what track your student is on. So if your student is on the diploma track, this should lay out what credits they need, and where they are now, how many units have been completed, and what needs to be done to get them to the diploma. And this is stated down here, whether it's certificate of completion or diploma. And this should describe what kind of coursework the student is doing in order to get there, including the units completed and the units pending. And it's very important for you to understand the certificate versus the diploma. We're going to go to the next slide where that's laid out a little bit. You really need to know the difference between these two. So those on diploma track are going to be finished with high school when they get their diploma about age 18. And generally all students who are capable of getting a high school diploma should be on diploma track. When they get their diploma, special education ends. They may still be eligible for 504 accommodations if they're in a college or vocational training program after school. So you may want to become more familiar with 504 accommodations and how to make sure those are set up in whatever program they go into. A high school diploma is going to be useful in getting a job, and it will be useful for getting into many college programs. It's not required for community college, but 4-year college programs generally require a diploma. And a diploma or a GED is usually required to enter the military. So getting a diploma is going to be important for many students' goals for after high school. But think about the fact it means they're going to be prepared for adulthood, that's transition to adulthood and leaving school sooner, because once they get that high school diploma, they are considered an adult and receiving adult services at that point. If your student is not intellectually capable of completing all the coursework required for a diploma, then they can get a certificate of completion. And when they get a certificate of completion, they can walk across the stage with all the other graduating seniors. No one will know the difference in the audience. They'll be handed their certificate just like other students are handed their diploma. But at that point, they will be offered an 18 to 22-year-old transition program focused on independent living skills and job training. If your student is on certificate track, when they're approaching, the graduation date from high school, or the point at which they get their certificate, you need to be researching with your IEP team what kind of transition program placements are available in your district. And you need to be thinking about this well before graduation. And you can think about this creatively. Usually there's not too many programs that are offered, but they can be tailored to meet your individual students' needs. Often you can include coursework at a community college. You can include meaningful job experiences within the transition programs that are set up by your school district, but it might require you to really work hard at making sure these things are included. So now we touched on age of majority previously, briefly, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more at this point, because part of the ITP is that the student is informed about the fact that they are reaching the age of majority. And this section of the ITP states that the student is to be informed when you reach the age of 18, the age of majority, you have the right to receive all information about your educational program and make all decisions related to your education. This includes the right to represent yourself at an IEP meeting and to sign the IEP meeting, the IEP document in place of your parent or guardian. So this is sort of a big deal. The student usually will actually receive something in the mail describing their rights to them, and this box will be checked at the IEP meeting on or before the student's 17th birthday. So a year before they actually reach 18, they are to be informed of the fact that they're going to have these rights and responsibilities at the age of 18. And so we hope that they're prepared for this. This is an ambitious list that was put together by Sue Sawyer from the California Transition Alliance. And, you know, I'm sure most students don't meet all of these, but what we would hope is that when the students reach the age of majority, that they are able to understand their disability, they are able to advocate for themselves, they understand why they're getting special education services, that they're able to participate in and possibly even lead their IEP meeting. They're able to be involved and invited to be involved in the interpretation of test results. They are able to review their educational records, and they know their rights under Section 504, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's what we would hope. That's the ideal, is that they're able to do all of those things. That's going to be hard for many students, but those should be the goals you're working towards. Here's a list of some resources on self-advocacy that some are prepared by students for students. Others are general information that is important for parents to know. But here's a list of resources, and you might want to share this with your young person if you can get them interested in their own IEP and their own services. That can be very useful. And here's some things they can think about. So self-advocacy becomes very, very important at this point, and it's a skill that could and should be taught early. So if you haven't started working on that with your student, please do. But it's best if that started in middle school, but should be continuing all the way through to keep working on helping them understand what they need and how to ask for it. So how are the transition goals, services, and activities included in the IEP? We have the IEP ask at this point. And, you know, there's these check boxes, and sometimes, you know, if you're not paying attention, you'll just get a couple pages in the IEP with these boxes all checked. Is there an age appropriate, measurable post-secondary goal in the IEP as needed for education, training, and employment? This should be checked, yes. Is the post-secondary goal addressed in conjunction with the development of the annual IEP? Yes. Are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable the student to meet their post-secondary goals? Of course, this will say yes again. And are there annual goals included that are related to the transition services needs? So obviously all of these should be checked, yes, and they probably will be. But think about whether the goals and community experiences that are included in your students' ITP and IEP are boilerplate, or whether they're really individualized to your students. And an example might be boilerplate. A student will research community college options, period. And what you might want is something more like the student will research community colleges in the immediate area which offer a certificate program in animal husbandry. So that would actually be specific to what the individual student is looking for. And then are the annual goals that are linked to the overarching post-secondary goals, activities, and community experience, are they actually moving the student towards their post-secondary goals while also fulfilling California state standards? An example might be if the California Common Core state standard is demonstrated, like demonstrating the command of conventions of standard English capitalization, punctuation, and spelling when writing, then you might say everyone on the team agrees that the student meets the standard when they learn the information and apply the information in a real life setting. For example, if they have a goal of attaining a part-time job in a community restaurant, then this goal might be met if they can fill out the job application completely and accurately. So they're meeting the state standard on grammar and punctuation, but they're demonstrating that by doing something that's of practical use to them in meeting their post-secondary goal. So think about how this all ties together as the plan is being developed. So then, as with the IEP, you get to the point of we need to design the ITP. And think about the fact that if your student has reached the age of 18, they're the ones who get to sign this, not you. And that actually is the case if they are 18. And many students, if they're in a transition program, an 18 to 22-year-old program, there are going to be several years that they are the ones that are allowed to sign the ITP. And this would be the case unless they're actually legally conserved. If your student is on diploma track, this may only affect 1 year, and it's possible your student will actually graduate before they actually turn 18, but it may only happen once that they get to sign their IEP. But in any case, this will come up probably for most of you, and ideally you'll have discussed this issue with your student. Now the student can sign a form that gives their parents permission to make educational decisions for them. And you can get a student to sign a form like that, whether or not they're conserved. But one way or another, you'll have talked about this with your student, and you'll go into the meeting knowing how you're going to come to a decision together on agreeing or disagreeing with the ITP. So you're not at the point of disagreeing when you're in the meeting. And even if your student has given you permission to make the decisions, or if they're conserved, still it's best to have them participating actively in the decisions, even if you're officially still the decision maker. At this point, we need to start thinking about who's going to serve the student after they leave high school. So these are some of the agencies you might want to start learning about and learning how to deal with. The Department of Rehabilitation is really one of the most important, because the Department of Rehabilitation has the goal as a state agency to get people with any kind of disability into meaningful and paying work. So they have lots of services around getting students into programs that will help them get a job. And they have both programs related to students who are still in school or in a training program or community college, and they have sort of student-oriented a program that helps students get internships and other work experiences that are related to what they're studying, what they're trying to move towards. They also have programs for those who want to get into full-time work, and they have job coaching. They have lots of services. Sometimes they have work experiences training programs that actually involve full-time work in a supported situation to help the student or the young adult develop their job skills. So if you haven't checked out the Department of Rehabilitation, you really should do so. And they may be serving your student in a workability program in high school that starts earlier. It starts possibly at 16. So check that out. Regional center, if appropriate. Your student may be a regional center client. If they are, having the regional center involved is important. Again, your student may be eligible for SSI, maybe not, but this is something, again, to think about whether your student should qualify and start the process of getting them qualified if you think they do. Disability Rights California has a lot of resources on dealing with Social Security, so you might want to check that out. If your student is planning any kind of education after high school, you might want to start again checking this out. Community colleges generally have robust services for students with disability. Four-year college, it really varies with the individual college. You want to, if your student is thinking of applying to a four-year college, you really want to check out what they have available. All colleges are required to provide 504 accommodations, but in some it's pretty minimal, and in others they have pretty robust support services. So it really just depends on the individual four-year college or university. And then the same is true of technical schools. Many will have very robust supports. Others will just do minimal 504 accommodations, but you should check out what's available and what kind of supports they provide. And then residential or independent living services. This is a big challenge for many parents with students that are needing supported living situations. So the sooner you can start looking into that, the better. It's often very challenging to find openings in an appropriate setting. So start working on that as soon as you can. And then medical services. How is your student going to access medical students? Are they going to stay on your insurance? Are they going to be served by Medi-Cal? Do they know how to get medical services on their own? Are you going to have to be still helping them with making appointments and getting them to appointments? So think about how that's going to take place and what supports are needed. So any of these agencies can be invited to an ITP meeting. You're going to have to do some work to get them there. It's not going to be automatic. Don't just count on your students' special ed teacher to take care of all this. If you want these people invited, make sure you communicate with them and ask that they be invited. And you may have to set up separate meetings with them because it's as you know, it's hard to schedule meetings and hard to get people from other agencies to take the time to get to meetings. So it's going to be something that takes a little work on your part to do the coordination. So all of that's done. You have an ITP in place. And remember, this plan is like a map. You have to check it often to see where you are and make sure you're on the right track to where you're going. And that this plan is going to be revised at least annually to see that things are on track and see what changes are needed. There will be changes needed as your student develops, their interests become clearer, their skills develop, and the needs are more clearly outlined. I'm going to run through a few slides of points that we always want participants in our workshops to think about. So one is we always want to focus on effective and collaborative communication. Whatever kind of IEP or ITP meeting you're in, clear communication, cooperation, and collaboration are the best way to get a good plan and work through the system. And here are just some suggestions on how you might talk so the schools will listen to you, and how to listen so the schools will communicate with you. You can acknowledge and process your own emotions. You focus on your students' needs rather than on your own. Listen and ask questions. Repeat and reflect back and rephrase what's said for clarification. Build on small agreements. Use humor and be appreciative when you can. Be grateful and assume your ITP team, your IEP team are doing the best that they can. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but remember that all of these folks went into education to help students, not to get in their way or put up barriers. When you do have a conflict with your IEP team or your ITP team, and trying to be effective in your communication is not helping, then you have to climb the ladder and figure out who you go to get a dispute resolved. Everyone works for somebody else, so you go up the administrative chain to find someone who can make decisions and who can help you solve your problem. There are suggestions that are put forth by the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education, so that's a good website to check out. So the other things you can do, you can always call us to discuss and strategize on how to resolve a disagreement. You might be able to connect with an individual teacher, with a principal, with a district program manager, or a special ed director, to work with them one-on-one to try to get issues solved. You can always call an IEP meeting or a specific meeting to deal with the ITP. If you're having trouble communicating with your team, some SELPAs, and we haven't defined SELPA, but we will in a minute. Some SELPAs offer a service of having facilitators to come in and help run ITP or IEP meetings to make sure everybody's heard and everybody's viewpoints are respectfully discussed and considered. There's also a service that SELPAs often provide called Alternative Dispute Resolution. This is something that's a service that's available to help resolve disputes without having to go through due process or without having to file a compliance complaint. It's not binding, so you can participate in this and all of your rights to pursue the disagreement further are still intact. And then if it's really necessary, you can file a compliance complaint or you can consider due process through the Office of Administrative Hearings. And we do have workshops coming up that describe these processes and your formal means of resolving disputes through your procedural safeguards. We have those workshops coming up if you're interested in learning more about those processes. So we also think it's great if you would consider participating in your community advisory committee. So every area has something called a SELPA, a state education local plan area. That's what that acronym stands for. And it's a state mandated consortium that provides for all special education needs of children or students living within its boundaries. Usually this boundary is a county. So there is a Marin SELPA, Napa SELPA, a Sonoma SELPA, and a Solano SELPA. In Solano County, there's a little bit of a difference in that Vallejo is not part of Solano's SELPA. It's its own SELPA. So for the counties we serve, you can find out about the CACs through clicking on this link. You can also just Google them. You can Google, for example, Sonoma SELPA, and it will lead you to information on the CAC. So those things can be found online, but we have links here if you want to find them. But if you live elsewhere in California, if you're not in one of the counties we serve, you can still find this. Just Googling, you can find what SELPA serves your local area. And as far as I know, all of them have alternative dispute resolution processes, but they all often also have some kind of community advisory committee. It's a requirement they do. And this would be a great way for you to learn more about what's going on in special education in your particular area. And then there's other ways, other volunteer activities at the school. We know all of you are working hard on behalf of your own student, and it may be that that's all the time and energy you have. But if you have some extra time and energy, participating in these other opportunities can be very useful in helping not just your student, but other students, and can also be educating to you and also a rewarding experience. And with that, we're required to let you know that we have gotten grants from both the Federal Office of Special Education and the California Department of Education. And we are very grateful for their funding, but their funding doesn't cover everything we do. We try hard to keep all of our services free to parents. And if you would like, however, to donate, we would gratefully accept any donations.